as usual, we're doing this with
zero prep. I didn't get into any of the more graphic, crazy stories, but there's not really. It's just
you guys are middle school, right?
Yeah. A kid got hit in the head with a guitar a few times, and whatever. And by the way, that's a warning to there are other videos on YouTube.
You're going to talk about all the bands you were in up to your big one, No Address.
Right. Yeah, we were talking about all the bands we were in together, and that's what made us think about doing this. I started with wanting to play guitar. And my actual origin story of wanting to play guitar was I was hanging out with some older kids, and for whatever reason, someone put on Walk This Way by Aerosmith. Now, which, by the way, was also kicked off by that awesome drum beat, the boom, boom, boom.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also, I'm obsessed with drums, so maybe that set me up. And I'm not so old. That record came out in 1975. I'm not nearly that old. But for whatever reason, they put that on. I just heard that sound, and I didn't know what guitar was. I literally didn't know what guitar was. I just heard it, and I was like, I don't know what that is, but I want to do that. Whatever is happening there.
I want to make my life.
I want to do that. I bet it took me maybe even 6 months to figure out that, that's guitar and that's what that is. And,
really?
Well, who do you ask? I was growing up in Tallahassee, Florida. As it turned out, I found out later my uncles played and they were really influential on me and so on and so forth. At the time, being 12 or 13 years old or whatever, it took me a minute to put two and two together and watch some MTV and go, wait a second. So my parents were nice enough to get me a guitar, and my best friend down the street, maybe even more of a brother, when I decided I wanted to play guitar, he was like, yeah, I'm in. We're going to get guitars for our birthdays or whatever, and we're going to start a band. So we were...
a two-guitar band?
It was going to be two guitars. Which actually will turn into a story later. It really will. Because our first band, and I don't know how many gigs we did. I mean, not a ton, but we probably did 20 or 30 gigs. It was two guitars, drummer, no vocals. We would play covers. We would play Sweet Child of Mine verbatim. Just without the bass line and without the vocals.
You have Sweet Child without the bass line or the vocals.
Just the two guitars and the drums. And we would play places.
You would? You'd play in public places?
We did open mics and church youth groups, and we did some birthday parties and stuff because we were it was a band. Yeah, it was terrible. Can you imagine? We'd do these covers verbatim. Just no vocals,
without
no
the
bass.
Important stuff.
Without the important stuff. Yeah. Well, the guitar solos were there, so I would argue.
Okay.
My buddy he was obsessed with camcorders in general and had figured out how to record playing video games and stuff, Nintendo, and was the kind of guy who would play video games, but he would tape it and then he would watch back his video game play and see if he could get better at playing the video game. And so we got our guitars, and the first thing we did was set up the camcorder and start pretending to play songs. Before we didn't know chord, we didn't know anything. We would just
You were playing air guitar with guitars in your hands.
Yeah. And then we'd look back and be like, oh, that looked... Okay, so you should definitely... That move's good. Oh, never do that. That looks lame. That looks lame.
No cart before the horse going on
No
here.
cart before that. It's funny, though, that I now coach performance and stuff because that, from the genesis, was... Those things are linked. I should worry about that stuff more than I do now. I certainly don't try to perform now in a lot of ways. But from the beginning, those things are not separate. There isn't just the making music and just the performing it. And in a physical way, they're lined up. Because when you're playing guitar, some of the way you move your body is about playing the instrument. So we started a band called Odyssey. That was the band that was two guitars and drums. Like I said, we did that for a bit and did some open mics and stuff. And then Heresies of Heresies, I started playing with Phil, who...
I was like, I haven't heard of that band, Heresies of Heresies.
Heresies. That is actually the kind of band name. That was exactly where we were living, was Heresies of Heresies. There was another kid down the street, and they had a little band, and they were playing Metallica tunes. And I learned a bunch of Metallica stuff. One time I went down there, and Phil was there, who I'm sure I've talked about Phil Martin on this. Been musical partners since we were, I don't know, 14, maybe 13. I don't know what. He also played guitar, but he was also interested in bass. So we brought a bass player on. So then we were all of a sudden starting to get serious. We got not only guitars, but basses too. And then, I'm ashamed to admit it, but we got a singer. That is when my high school band, Sudden Heaven, was born. And I'm leaving out my good buddies, Jason Harrell and stuff, in 55 Seconds. I was in several bands in like middle school and so on. 55 Seconds was called 55 Seconds because we lost at Battle of the Bands by going over 55 seconds. Oh. So then we changed the name of the band to 55 Seconds. My high school band was called Sudden Heaven, and it originally was, those guys, and then Kevin Vidinger came on. The point is, kind of going into ninth grade, we had this really functional little rock band, and we started doing really anything we could get our hands on. I don't know, did you perform at all in your teens? I mean, I know you did stuff in college, like a cappella stuff in college. But
not much in my teens.
Yeah.
No, I really started my freshman year of college.
We kind of did the talent shows at school, but then we did birthday parties. We did a lot of birthday parties. Probably when I was in ninth grade or so is when we started like just begging anywhere where kids would hang out, like pizza parlors and stuff. Hey, we'll set up in the corner and play, Another story I tell people about, you can really up your potential later. It is a funny story that, given my life, that in ninth grade, I failed guitar class.
Right. And what was the reason for that?
The reason for that, in my defense, the reason for that is they were teaching classical guitar, and I was not interested in that.
You would skip that class and stay home and play scales.
That is true. That is true.
Practice guitar.
Yeah,
so you failed guitar because you were at home practicing guitar.
Yeah. And I tell people this because I don't recommend doing it. When I was younger, there was a period where I was doing scales and finger exercises 4 to 6 to 8 hours a day. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And then I realized I was in a lesson with Lily the other day. I can play scales and talk at the same time. And again, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Looking back, that was not a great use of time.
Some of the things I remember you telling me about were, one, there was a moment when you suddenly became cool that coincided with Nirvana.
That deserves to go in the story. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was just that I had started playing music before high school, and I was a grungy, like I tried to grow my hair out, so it was just like that, like it wasn't long hair, it was just like you didn't get a haircut for 2 years, which was long, but it was like that grunge looking, and I was not popular, let's say that. Then luckily Nirvana came along. And Smells Like Teen Spirit hit the airwaves, and I coincidentally looked like those guys because I was just kind of a bummy, schlubby kid with long hair, and I always had a flannel shirt tied around my waist, not because of grunge, but just because of like whatever, and ripped jeans and the whole thing. I went from being very unpopular to being on the cooler end of things. It was a weird turnaround. It was actually a weird life-affecting turnaround to be like...
I didn't change. Why do people like me all of a sudden?
The least popular kid in school, and then getting into high school, it started being... When it was my first year of high school, and we played the talent show, and it was, ironically, it was in the gymnasium, just like the video of Smells Like Teen Spirit. And we did this song, Smells Like Teen Spirit, and it like blew up. But yeah, what we figured out was, at least in Tallahassee, absolutely nowhere to go if you were certainly under 18, but I think at the time under 21. There was just not really, you couldn't go see music, you couldn't go to shows, there weren't whatever. And what we figured out pretty quickly was that we could go to venues and say, hey, what if we rented your venue? What if we gave you $500, you put away the booze, and we'll bring in a show and we'll do a ticketed show? They got pretty big pretty quickly. So yeah, they immediately kind of were 200 and 300, and then by the time we were winding down on that band, we were often sell 400 or 500 tickets to shows. And a lot of it was because there just wasn't anything else for kids to do. And we had to jump around a lot because we'd do a show, we'd give a bar $500 to let us do a show, and then we'd bring in 300 or 400 people. And then next time they would be like, no, we're going to do a percentage. We're not letting you. So we'd have to jump over. And we did all these. We did shows at VFWs. We did shows at the Women's League. Did shows at the Armory. We just jumped around where anybody would let us do it. And then they'd be like, oh, wait a second. You're not.
I need a cut of this.
I need a bigger cut of this. And we'd be like, all right, we're going to go somewhere else. We were little mercenaries. We did weird ones too. Art galleries. We did an art gallery. We literally had to build a stage for ourselves.
Oh my gosh.
And we figured out too, because we had a few injuries, because you can't just pile hundreds of kids into a room. As it turns out. So we would hire off-duty police officers. You just call the police department and say, like, we would like...
Oh my gosh.
3 off-duty police officers. And you pay them like $7,500 or whatever. You know, it was the 90s. And they would just, they were very happy to work off duty.
They would just stand there, basically,
yeah, they
right?
just stand there. It was the era of moshing, and that was actually a major problem. Like, I can't tell you how many shows we had to stop because of moshing.
Oh.
Where you just would have to stop. We're ending this whole thing. Everybody's going home if you guys don't knock that off, because it's getting too violent. Smaller people are getting, like, sucked into the... Not that moshing is about hurting people, but, like, you are running around at full speed, and like smaller people are getting knocked over, and like you can't do that. Yeah, so I did Sudden Heaven all the way through high school. That turned into a band called Honey Gun. I only mention because that's a fun name, but that was me and Phil, one of the most intuitive musicians I've been around. I mean, you just talk about somebody who just is smart enough to refuse to think.
Oh, I like that phrase.
As a rock musician, he refuses to put thought into it. He will go way out of his... He doesn't want to know what the chords are, what the lyrics are. It's a jokey story, but it's true. Like, he sang harmony vocals in lots of bands, but No Address too. And he wouldn't know the words. He would just sing nonsense that went along with whatever the actual words were. But he just is like genius at just going like, it's about feeling. I don't want to know. I don't even want to start thinking. I'm just going to like bash through it. And it's just, and he's just amazing at that.
And he's still making music constantly today. I see him on Instagram. He
constantly.
Writes all the time.
Yeah. Phil Morton, The Trouble with Love is one of his projects. I mean, he does a project or two a year. It's really nuts. He's got a crazy discography at this point. That kind of brings us to college, where the high school band broke up acrimoniously.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was not great.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
Yeah,
that.
we were pretty mad at each other. Phil and I have a extreme level of comfort with loving each other and not liking each other. We're fine with all of it. Yeah, no, it ended badly, and they actually badmouthed me fairly badly in some of the garbagey zine.
Oh.
Yeah, it was not a great...
What'd you do? I'm sure it wasn't anybody's fault.
No, it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just one of those transitional things. Everybody in bands goes through them, and you know, it's weird how much anger you can pick up about that stuff. I mean, we were all cool very soon after. And then, gosh, man, I played in a bunch of weird, garbagey bands, cover bands. Nothing against any of those people. That's kind of when I got into the grindy 4-night-a-week cover bands for a little bit. And then I got into a band called Stash, which was interesting because I played drums in Stash. And part of that was my frustration with the band things. I just didn't want to play guitar for a while.
Oh. You just picked up drums then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I started playing drums when I was 19-ish. You know, and I was never a good drummer at all. 2 things I had going for me. A little bit of a sense of how parts went together. I've said this to you before, but my Uncle Baron was amazing at really pushing me on stuff. And he was constantly telling me, if you don't know all the parts in the song, like, you don't need to be able to play them. But if you don't know what everybody's doing in a song, you don't really know that song. Mm-hmm. And he started telling me that when I was first picked up the guitar at 12 and 13. And he was like, if you don't, he would constantly be like, you know, you'd hear me play something and be like, oh, that's cool, but what's the drummer doing there? And I'd be like, well, I don't know, because I'm playing the guitar part. And he's like, well, you should know what the drummer's doing.
Yeah.
You know, like, what is it? Is he shuffling? Is he on the hi-hat? Is he on the ride? What's he doing? Are you an idiot? What's he doing? You know?
Tough love.
Yeah, a little bit of tough love. Now, most drummers can play to click tracks. That's a very common thing. At the time, most drummers could not play to click tracks, and probably from playing scales to metronomes for so long, I could play to a click. You weren't going to get any cool fills or anything, but if you needed to play to something that was going to just sit right there and be straight. Stash wasn't really rap rock necessarily. The singer was more singy, but the music was that kind of early 2000s funky, heavy, and we had a DJ. He was throwing in live samples, but literally from a record, putting in break beats with stuff like juggling or samples, where the song would have a sample in the verse and he was like literally juggling the turntables to run the sample.
Cool.
But to do that, you needed to be locked down.
Right.
About that time was when I started getting interested in recording. My high school band did our first EP when I was 15 or so. We put out a full-length album when I was 18 and really learned to record on one of those cassette 4-tracks. You guys have no idea what this is. You used to put a cassette in and it would give you 4 tracks, right? And you could make bigger recordings because you could record 1, 2, 3 things and bump those 3 things over to the one track and then record back over those tracks, bump it over and stuff. Sort of in the stash years is when I got really obsessed with recording and eventually opened up my recording studio in Florida with Phil Morton as a partner, because that's how I do things. And Phil and I, made a bunch of punk records.
What was that record that you sang on that I heard a little bit of one time?
That was Sudden Heavens, Stand Everything Up. That record came out in 95. We borrowed $3,500 from my dad at interest to print 600 CDs and 600 cassette tapes. Now you can get 100 CDs printed for $100. But back then it took like $3,500 to get like 600 CDs. And it probably terrible for marketing, although we sold a lot of those CDs. And we went through a few pressing runs of that. But
wow.
Yeah, but one of the confusing things was everybody in that band sang lead sometimes. And singing in my case was a real... in quotes. I was just kind of yelling.
You had some soul in it, though. You had some real feeling in your singing. When I heard it, I was oddly impressed.
It was so funny, too, because I went from... And this is a period I think lots of musicians go through and maybe don't really make it through the other side. Or maybe they find where they should really be in that. A switch flipped in my head to where I wanted to be doing the most challenging music possible. Where it had been like, let's write music that people will like. I want to write music that people will not like. that only the most adventurous people will like. And that's when I started doing all the lead vocals. And that's where it went really off the rails. I was actively trying to write music where you couldn't tell what the key was. I was trying to write things where you couldn't find the root.
Oh my gosh. Great exercises, I bet.
I mean, so dumb. Why would you do that? Why would you want to make something that's hard to listen to? Where that is the point of it, Although I have to say, man, I'll give it up to Phil and Kevin. I have some rehearsal recordings of those days.
They could play it. So that takes us up to right before No Address.
We'll do a separate thing for No Address. But yeah, those were the old Tallahassee, Florida days,
Rehearsing in hot warehouses in the Florida summer heat.
Rehearsing in hot ware, yeah. And then we would hang out in alleys.
Okay.
Because we couldn't get into any of the clubs. Right. So the older bands that were playing, and we would just beg them to crack the door or something by the bouncer at the front of the door. So he was letting people into the show, but you could hear it through the thing.
Oh my gosh.
Did that all the time.
There was no YouTube. There was no way to go. I mean, there probably was some way to find a recording somewhere, but it wasn't easy by any means.
Oh, and that's how you'd learn gear stuff. Ambush people by their car and be like, hey man, that one sound on the thing, and it went whoa, 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 whoa. And they were like, yeah, it's a wah pedal, dude. And you're like, wah pedal. All right, cool. That was literally...
You guys must have been so annoying.
Oh, we were so annoying. Part of where stuff kind of took off, and my high school band was on the radio a bit, and then certainly Stash was, and then No Address was. A little bit of why is because of how much I used to bug the radio DJs. Because they used to, in the old days, they would go, coming up in the next hour, we've got this, and the new Stone Temple Pilot. And I would be sitting at home with a boombox ready to tape the new Stone Temple Pilot. And then they wouldn't play it. And so I'd call the radio station and be like, yeah, you said you were going to play the new Stone Temple Pilots. And it's been 30 minutes. And when are you going to play it? Because I want to tape it. And then by the time we started playing places, the DJs were like, oh, you're that annoying kid who will not stop calling the radio station. I was like, yeah, that's me. And they were like, okay, cool, we'll have you should come in. We'll have you as a guest on the show. But it was funny that people knew us because we annoyed people just to death. I mean, we didn't mean to be annoying, but we were just so obsessed with it. Calling the radio station 10 times a night, and I'm really not joking, 10 times a night. Just
seriously?
Hey, can you play I heard about this one song by so-and-so, and there's no other way to hear it, but I heard about this song. Will you play this song?
Oh my gosh.
And you haven't played it. Are you going to play it? It's just the DJs would be like, you're that kid good.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people still have that experience even with YouTube and all this stuff. I mean, I'm sure it's not that different, kind of doing those teenage things where you're just
when you get obsessed.
And that's one of the best ways to learn. I mean, honestly, it's great to go through a period where you're just making mistakes and just, putting things out there. And I was very lucky to have that time. And I will close actually with the best advice. Everyone has heard me say this. If you know me, you've heard me say this. Probably the best thing anybody ever did for me musically was my Uncle Baron, who would often say, hey, so you know how you get good, right? You just suck till you don't suck anymore.
Right. It's the best advice.
Yeah.
That's helped me. I mean, I met you after I could already sing.
Certainly,
but
yeah.
It's helped me with bass. I wouldn't say I'm nerve-free. I certainly get nervous, but I'm fearless. Like, I don't fear putting myself in terrifying situations, like open mics or Nate's Jam.
Yeah.
Because there are... I see no consequences from it. It is a required part of the journey. Just suck until you don't suck anymore. And if you refuse to go through that process, you're just going to keep sucking. So I'm like, all right, let's get it over with. Let's get it over with. The sooner the better.
You just got to suck until you don't suck anymore. Like it's just, and I did so much of that with so many bands where you're like sitting there playing and you're like, whew, this is not good.
Yeah.
But it will be if we just keep going. And that was such a gift I was given. It was so great to be able to start from that place.
Yes. Perfectionism in music is a killer.
Yeah.
It's a killer of creativity and a killer of freedom and of progress.
And a killer of rock and roll. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that's not what it's about. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And this podcast is brought to you by Performance High.
Performance High Voice and Music Studio. And Stone IPA, I believe. I don't know if we've had them as a sponsor yet.
Stone IPA, by the way, don't overthink it. They were one of the first IPAs anywhere, one of the first I had, and oh my gosh, still one of the best. Stone IPA, thank you for your sponsorship.
We're raking it in these days, man.
We really appreciate it. Okay, thank you again. Talk to you soon.